The air in the studio was thick with tension. The playful, casual vibe that had once filled the room had evaporated, replaced by an undeniable clash of wills. Karoline Leavitt, sitting across from Jimmy Kimmel, was no longer just a guest. She had become a force, unwilling to let her values be questioned without consequence. And Kimmel, for all his late-night charm and experience, was now on the defensive. He had pushed too far, and the moment he'd created was spiraling beyond his control. The audience, who had been expecting nothing more than a typical interview, now found themselves captivated by the growing confrontation. What started as a disagreement over political views was rapidly turning into something much more personal. The questions had stopped being about policies and had become attacks on Karoline's character, her beliefs, and her very identity. Is this how you justify everything? By insulting those who disagree with you? Kimmel's voice was sharp, accusing, almost venomous. His tone had turned bitter, the sarcasm creeping in like an unwelcome guest. He wasn't just challenging Karoline's politics anymore, he was questioning her entire approach to the world. Karoline, unflinching, met his gaze head-on. She wasn't about to back down, not now. "I don't insult anyone, Jimmy," she said, her voice calm but forceful. "I speak my truth. If that offends people who are more comfortable with lies, that's not my problem." Kimmel's face tightened, and the studio audience, which had previously been entertained by his jokes, grew eerily silent. The usual rhythm of the show had vanished. It was no longer a battle of words. It was a battle of principles, values, and what each person believed was right. Karoline wasn't just defending her stance on politics, she was defending her very right to speak freely, to be unapologetically herself in a world that often demanded conformity. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, Kimmel did something unexpected. With a smirk that barely concealed his frustration, he leaned back, in his chair, folding his arms. The change in his posture was subtle, but it was unmistakable. He was preparing to make his move. "You know, Karoline, you've got a lot of opinions," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "But do you ever stop to think about the consequences of those opinions? What happens when people listen to you and take your words at face value?" The question hung in the air, but Karoline wasn't about to let it slide. "The consequences of free speech are the responsibility of the speaker, Jimmy," she replied. "But that doesn't mean I'm going to water down my words just to make you or anyone else more comfortable." Kimmel's expression shifted. For a brief moment it seemed like he might respond with something witty, maybe even cut through the tension with one of his famous jokes. But that didn't happen. Instead, he did something that left everyone in the studio, and millions watching at home, in complete shock. He cut to a commercial break. The audience, stunned by the abrupt shift, exchanged confused glances. Some gasped, others whispered amongst themselves. Karoline sat there, her expression one of disbelief and frustration, as Kimmel stood up and waved to the camera, signaling the break. The production team, caught in the awkward moment, scrambled behind the scenes, unsure of what to do next. As the cameras faded to black, Karoline remained seated. Her eyes were fixed on Kimmel, and her chest rose and fell with the heavy breaths she took in. It wasn't just the interruption that had shocked her. It was the sheer audacity of it. Kimmel had always been known for his biting humor, his sarcastic edge, but this felt different. It felt personal. Behind the scenes, the show's producers tried to maintain their composure. They were used to tense moments, but nothing like this. The production team was on high alert, sensing that this would become a story of its own. What was happening on that stage could no longer be controlled. It was spiraling beyond anyone's expectations. As the cameras returned from the commercial break, the mood in the studio had changed. The audience, now fully aware of the tension, waited for Karoline to respond. Would she storm off the set? Would she confront Kimmel in front of the cameras? The possibility of an explosive fallout loomed large. Kimmel, meanwhile, seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. His smile had returned, But it was forced, and the usual charm he carried with him now felt like a facade. He turned back to Karoline, his posture stiffening as he attempted to reframe the conversation. "Okay, Karoline, I think we've had enough of the hard questions for tonight," he said, his voice carrying an almost condescending tone. "Let's get back to something lighter, shall we?" But Karoline wasn't having it. Her gaze was sharp, her voice unwavering. "No, Jimmy," she said, cutting him off mid-sentence. "We're not going to pretend like this didn't just happen. You tried to shut me down, and that's not okay. If you want me to stay, we're going to have an honest conversation. No more games." The studio fell silent once again, and for the first time Kimmel seemed unsure of how to proceed. He had underestimated Karoline. He had thought he could manipulate the conversation, steer it in a direction where he held the power. But she had turned the tables. She had forced him into a corner, and there was no way out. Now, it was clear to everyone. This was no longer just an interview. It was a showdown. The air was charged with palpable tension as the studio audience held their breath. Karoline Leavitt, once the target of Jimmy Kimmel's sharp humor and probing questions, had turned the tables. No longer was she the guest on a late-night show. She had become the center of the storm, her unrelenting conviction a stark contrast to Kimmel's deflected attempts to regain control. The producers, watching from the sidelines, exchanged nervous glances. They had been a part of many high-profile interviews, but nothing like this. Kimmel, a late-night legend known for keeping his guests under his thumb with his wit, had met his match. And it wasn't just any guest. Karoline Leavitt was someone who refused to be diminished, even by the best. With the tension thick in the air, Kimmel cleared his throat, his voice now laced with a hint of unease. Okay, I get it, Karoline," he said, his attempt at levity falling flat. "Let's have this honest conversation, as you put it." But Karoline wasn't interested in playing by his rules anymore. Her response was swift, cutting through the silence like a blade. "I didn't come here to be silenced, Jimmy," she began, her voice steady but piercing. "I came here because I believe in something bigger than all of us, something you and many others in this industry seem to have forgotten. The truth. And the truth doesn't get watered down just because it's inconvenient for you or anyone else." The room seemed to hold its collective breath. It was no longer a simple interview. It was a moment of truth. Karoline wasn't just speaking about politics anymore. She was speaking about something more profound. The courage to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. Kimmel, caught off guard by her fierce resolve, let out a forced chuckle, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Oh, is that what this is about? The truth? You really think you're some sort of truth warrior, Karoline?" He leaned in, his eyes narrowing as if trying to provoke her. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're just a politician playing to the cameras. You think people believe you? You think people actually listen to what you say?" The audience, once supportive of the playful banter, now found themselves on edge. What had started as an entertaining exchange was quickly descending into something far more contentious. People could feel the heat rising in the room, and it was clear that this wasn't just a battle of ideologies, it was a battle for respect. Karoline, now visibly irritated by Kimmel's condescension, stood her ground. "You can think whatever you want, Jimmy," Karoline shot back, her voice unwavering. "But I'm not here for your approval. I'm not here to entertain you or your audience. I'm here to speak the truth and to hold people like you accountable." There was no turning back now. Karoline's words struck a nerve. The audience, which had been sitting in quiet suspense, suddenly became more engaged. There was no question in anyone's mind now. This was bigger than a simple interview. This was about a larger cultural battle, one that went beyond politics, beyond entertainment. This was a moment where the truth had been forced into the spotlight. Kimmel, realizing the weight of the situation, attempted to deflect, but his words faltered. "So, what do you expect me to do, Karoline?" You really think I'm going to sit here and just agree with everything you say? Karoline didn't flinch. I don't expect you to agree with me, Jimmy, but I do expect you to respect me, just as I respect the right of others to speak their minds. If you can't do that, then maybe it's you who doesn't belong here. The studio, still reeling from the tension, fell silent once more. This wasn't just an argument, it was a challenge. Karoline had taken a stand, and now she was daring Kimmel, and anyone watching, to stand with her. She was done playing the role of the meek politician on a talk show. This wasn't just about politics, it was about integrity, about staying true to oneself no matter the pressure. And in that moment, the narrative shifted completely. It was no longer about Kimmel trying to expose Karoline, it was about her exposing him. His attempt to undermine her was backfiring, and the tide was turning. Kimmel, who had always been the master of the late-night stage, now seemed small and unprepared. He had underestimated her resolve. "You know, Karoline," he said, his voice tinged with frustration, "you're not what I thought you were. You're not the typical politician. You're a lot more, what's the word, intense." Karoline, her posture straight and her voice steady, responded with a smile that wasn't friendly but full of defiance. "You're right, Jimmy. I'm not the typical politician. I'm someone who believes in standing up for what's right, no matter what it costs me. And if that means losing a talk show appearance, so be it. At least I'll leave here knowing I spoke my truth." The audience, sensing the shift in power, erupted in applause. The silence was broken, but it wasn't just any applause. It was a standing ovation, not for Kimmel, but for Karoline. She had won the respect of the crowd, not by caving to the pressure, but by standing firm in her beliefs. This wasn't just about political differences. It was about something deeper, something everyone could relate to. The courage to speak out, even when the odds are against you. Kimmel, caught off guard by the unexpected turn of events, smiled, albeit sheepishly. "Well, Karoline," he said, attempting to regain some composure, "you certainly know how to make an impression. I guess we'll see what happens next." But Karoline didn't need to say another word. She had made her point, and in that moment it was clear who had won. She hadn't just held her own, she had triumphed. The studio, once charged with the tension of an on-air confrontation, had now shifted into a strange, almost surreal calm. The interview, originally set to be a light-hearted and entertaining segment, had transformed into something far more profound. Karoline Leavitt, with her unwavering determination, had not only survived the test, she had emerged victorious. As the applause from the audience continued to echo, Karoline stood up from her seat, her expression a mixture of relief and quiet. Triumph. She hadn't just delivered a message, she had sent a shockwave through the late-night landscape. Kimmel, a seasoned host accustomed to being the center of attention, was left reeling, his confidence shaken in front of a national audience. Behind the scenes, the producers were scrambling. They had never seen anything like this before. The phone lines lit up with calls from network executives, all wondering what the next move would be. Would Kimmel try to salvage the show? Would they cut the interview short and move on to the next segment? There was no script for what had just unfolded, and no one was sure what the repercussions would be. But one thing was clear. Karoline had just sparked a conversation that no one would be able to ignore. What had started as a seemingly routine late-night appearance had ignited a firestorm. Her bold stand against Kimmel's tactics had not only captivated the audience in the studio, but had also sent ripples across social media. Clips of the confrontation were already circulating on Twitter, YouTube, and news outlets. The narrative was clear. Karoline Leavitt had taken on the king of late-night TV, and she had won. As she made her way off the stage, Karoline was met with a mixture of reactions. Some of the crew members, hesitant at first, now offered her nods of approval. She had done something that no one had dared to do before. She had stood her ground against one of the most influential figures in the entertainment industry. And, In doing so, had redefined what it meant to have a voice on national television. The cameras, however, didn't stop rolling. As Karoline made her way to the backstage area, the conversation was far from over. Kimmel, left alone on the stage, attempted to regain his usual composure, but even as he smiled and gave a final wave to the camera, the damage had been done. The playful demeanor he once carried had vanished, replaced by a tension that no amount of scripted jokes could fix. "All right, folks, that's it for tonight's show," Kimmel said, his voice betraying his frustration. He quickly thanked the sponsors and ushered in the credits, his usual charisma unable to mask the awkwardness of the moment. The cameras, however, didn't miss a beat. The narrative had shifted. Kimmel, the late-night legend, had been humbled on his own turf. As the show wrapped up, the discussion turned to Karoline's impact. People weren't just talking about the interview. They were talking about what her bold stance represented. For many, Karoline had become a symbol of defiance, a reminder that no matter how powerful or untouchable someone may seem, they could still be held accountable. The power of free speech had been demonstrated in a way that would resonate for a long time. On social media, the reactions were explosive. Some viewers praised Karoline for her courage, applauding her for standing up for what she believed in, even when faced with the full weight of late-night television's established norms. Others, however, criticized her for turning the interview into a political spectacle, claiming that she had hijacked a space meant for entertainment. But regardless of the opinions, one thing was certain: Karoline had disrupted the status quo in a way that few had ever done before. For Kimmel, the fallout would not be so easily avoided. The backlash from both his audience and critics would follow him long after the cameras stopped rolling. It wasn't just about the interview anymore. It was about the perception that had been created. Was he really the funny, charming host who could take on any guest? Or had he been revealed as someone who, when challenged, would resort to silencing those who disagreed with him? In the days that followed, the media buzz surrounding the interview grew louder. Articles, podcasts, and even late-night segments dissected what had happened, offering varying perspectives on who had truly won the encounter. Some said Kimmel had let his emotions get the better of him, while others claimed that Karoline had capitalized on the moment for her own political gain. But the most significant aspect of the discussion was this: Karoline had succeeded in forcing a national conversation about free speech, media bias, and the responsibility of those in power to engage with differing viewpoints. In private, Karoline knew that this wasn't just a victory in an interview. It was a victory for the cause she had long championed. This was more than a political stance. This was about reclaiming the narrative, about fighting for the right to speak without fear of retribution. It wasn't about winning a late-night segment. It was about winning the respect of an entire nation. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues, supporters, and even critics. They all had something to say about the interview. Some celebrated her bravery, while others scolded her for the way she had handled the situation. But Karoline didn't mind. She wasn't here for applause or approval. She was here to make sure the truth would always have a place on the stage, no matter the cost. And as she sat back, reflecting on the day's events, one thought echoed in her mind. This was only the beginning. In the days following the explosive interview, the media frenzy surrounding Karoline Leavitt and Jimmy Kimmel reached a fever pitch. Every outlet, from traditional news channels to social media platforms, had their own take on what had transpired. But amidst all the noise, one thing became undeniably clear: Karoline had made her mark. The fallout for Kimmel was swift. He found himself in the midst of a public relations nightmare. While his loyal fans remained supportive, the cracks in his image began to show. Critics, both within the entertainment industry and beyond, began to question whether the way he handled the interview was in line with the values of free expression and respect for diverse opinions. The reputation of a late-night icon, who had prided himself on being the voice of reason and humor in turbulent times, now faced serious scrutiny. The power dynamics had shifted, and it was clear that the balance of control was no longer firmly in his hands. On the other hand, Karoline's political profile soared. Her interview, which had started as a simple appearance on a talk show, had transformed into a defining moment of her career. Public figures, once skeptical of her approach and her rise to prominence, now began to take notice. Her message resonated with countless people who were tired of seeing the truth suppressed or twisted for the sake of entertainment. Her unwavering defense of free speech had not only made her a symbol of courage, it had propelled her to the forefront of the national conversation. But it wasn't just the headlines or the social media mentions that mattered to Karoline. For her, this moment was far more significant than any personal gain or media attention. She had always believed in standing firm for what she believed in, even when it meant taking on some of the most powerful figures in the country. She wasn't interested in being a pawn in a system that silenced opposing voices. She wanted to ensure that no one, regardless of their status, could stifle dissent. In the weeks that followed, Karoline received an outpouring of support. People from all walks of life, from everyday citizens to high-profile figures in the political world, reached out to express their admiration for her bravery. Many hailed her as a hero, a symbol of the fight against the growing trend of censorship in media. Her stance, once thought to be reckless by some, had become a rallying cry for those who believed that the free exchange of ideas should never be stifled by power or influence. But not everyone was pleased with the outcome. Kimmel's supporters, still loyal to their host, launched a counteroffensive, accusing Karoline of playing dirty and politicizing what was supposed to be a light-hearted, entertaining show. They claimed she had turned the tables on Kimmel in an unfair way, using her platform to further her own agenda. Despite these criticisms, Karoline remained unshaken. She had made her decision in the heat of the moment, and she stood by it. She hadn't just reacted emotionally. She had seized an opportunity to speak the truth, and she had done so with purpose and conviction. The political ramifications of the interview were not lost on anyone either. Karoline's bold words had ignited a firestorm of debate in Washington and beyond. In political circles, her rise to prominence was seen as a new chapter in the fight for free speech and individual rights. The conversation surrounding the interview extended well beyond the boundaries of the late-night talk show format. It became a touchstone for the ongoing national discourse on the role of media in shaping public opinion. As for Karoline, she knew this victory was only one battle in a much larger war. The fight for truth, transparency, and accountability was far from over. But that moment on Kimmel's stage had proven to her, and to everyone watching, that when you stand up for what you believe in, when you refuse to be silenced, no matter the odds, anything is possible. The impact of that single moment on Kimmel's show would echo for years to come. It wasn't just a late-night interview. It was a pivotal moment in the cultural conversation. Karoline had proven that it was possible to challenge the status quo, to disrupt the comfortable narratives that often go unquestioned. She had, in her own way, rewritten the rules of what it meant to be a guest on a talk show, and in doing so, had earned the respect of those who believed in the importance of free speech. And as the world continued to debate the fallout from that unforgettable night, one thing was certain. Karoline Leavitt had left her mark. In a world where the powerful often go unchecked, she had shown that the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, could not and would not be silenced. With her head held high, Karoline Leavitt walked away from the experience not just with a personal victory, but with a legacy that would shape the future of political discourse for years to come. It was supposed to be just another segment on a late-night talk show, a casual appearance to talk politics, social issues, and the latest buzz in the media world. But what Karoline Leavitt had in store for Jimmy Kimmel's audience would send shockwaves through the entertainment and political worlds alike. No one could have predicted what was about to unfold when she took her seat on the iconic Kimmel Live stage. For those who knew Karoline, the anticipation was already high. She was known for her sharp opinions, her unapologetic views on the political landscape, and her fearless ability to stir controversy. It was clear she wasn't going to back down or conform to the typical celebrity banter expected on talk shows. As she sat across from Jimmy Kimmel, her confidence radiated off her, and the audience buzzed with excitement, wondering what kind of firestorm she might ignite. But the atmosphere quickly began to shift. The interview, which had started with light conversation and the usual pleasantries, began to veer into dangerous territory. Kimmel, who had been known for his playful approach with guests, started pushing Karoline on issues that were known to be particularly sensitive. It was clear that he wasn't interested in a standard political conversation. He wanted something more. His tone shifted slightly, and his questions became pointed, almost confrontational. Was he looking to expose her flaws? Or was there something deeper he was trying to draw out? "What's your stance on the most divisive issues in the country right now, Karoline?" Kimmel asked, a playful grin tugging at his lips. The question was innocent enough, but everyone in the room knew it was a setup. Karoline wasn't the kind of person to shy away from such a challenge. She leaned forward, ready to answer, and it was then that the tension in the room began to rise. But the audience wasn't prepared for what came next. As Karoline began to respond with her usual boldness, something in her answer struck a nerve with Kimmel. His smile faded slightly and his questions became more aggressive, almost as if he was baiting her into a confrontation. The studio audience, once full of laughter and light-hearted chatter, grew quiet. Were they witnessing a clash of ideologies? Was this the start of a tense standoff that would end in unexpected drama? Karoline, in her usual fiery manner, didn't back down. She defended her stance on the issues, pushing back at Kimmel's increasingly pointed questions. She spoke about the power of free speech, the importance of standing firm in one's beliefs, and the need for authenticity in a time when politics and entertainment were becoming increasingly intertwined. Her words rang out, clear and strong, echoing in the ears of both the live audience and millions watching at home. But something was off. As Kimmel's demeanor shifted, so did the dynamic of the interview. The playful banter had turned into an interrogation. Kimmel, no longer just a host, was now challenging Karoline's entire political worldview. The more she pushed back, the more he pressed. It was no longer about light-hearted discussion. It was a battle of ideologies. At one point, Kimmel's sarcastic tone cut through the tension like a knife. "So let me get this straight, Karoline," he said, leaning forward, his voice laced with skepticism. "You're telling me that the way things are going in the world, your viewpoint is the one that's going to fix everything?" Karoline's eyes narrowed, her jaw set in a defiant line. She wasn't going to let Kimmel or anyone else distort her beliefs. "Yes, Jimmy," she responded firmly. "That's exactly what I'm saying. Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, and the change we need isn't going to come from staying silent." The studio audience was now fully invested in what was unfolding. People sat on the edge of their seats, unsure of what was going to happen next. Was Kimmel going to let her finish? Would he challenge her more directly? Or had the moment arrived when Karoline would take the stage in an even bigger way, confronting the host who had underestimated her? And then, without warning, it happened. Kimmel, growing visibly frustrated, interrupted her mid-sentence, cutting her off in the middle of her passionate response. The room fell silent as Karoline's words were drowned out by his sudden outburst. "I don't think you understand what you're saying," Kimmel said, his voice rising. "You're out of touch with reality." The comment hung in the air, heavy with implications. Was this an attack on her character? Was Kimmel questioning her competence on national television? The tension in the room thickened. The audience, sensing that something monumental was unfolding, watched with wide eyes. Could this be the moment Karoline Leavitt would stand up for herself, or would she let the late-night host walk all over her? Karoline's response was as swift as it was calculated. "I understand more than you think." "Jimmy!" she fired back, her voice steady but full of conviction. "I'm not afraid to speak the truth, even if it makes you uncomfortable. The truth isn't something to be afraid of. It's something to embrace. For a split second, the two locked eyes. Kimmel, the seasoned host, and Karoline, the outspoken, political figure. It was clear now that this wasn't going to be just another interview. It was becoming something more. What had started as a playful conversation had now escalated into a confrontation that neither of them could back down from. But the real twist was still to come.